Hello and welcome. Welcome to SSUC, Spiritual Seekers United in Community. We are an inclusive community, our welcome video says. You might recognize these words. We're an inclusive community seeking to live out a more just and generous spirituality. We think that spirituality isn't about beliefs and doctrines demanding agreement, but is about living fully and loving deeply. What unites us is our desire to create community where we all belong, where we're all safe to be ourselves, where we can question and ponder as we seek meaningful lives. And even though we're not in person with each other, we can still build that kind of community online, from a distance, with each other, today and all the days. So welcome. Welcome wherever you are in the world, in Edmonton and area, in Saskatoon, in Toronto, in the Okanagan, or around the world. Welcome, and we're happy to be together with you right now. Nancy and I are happy to join you in your homes whenever we have the opportunity, and thank you for letting us join you wherever you happen to be. We are joined here in Edmonton this morning by our musicians, by Jim and Catherine and Deb, and we're joined with technical support by Dara and Brett this morning. Want to welcome you to our continuing series, The Wisdom of Trees. Today we're going to continue that series with our third week entitled Learning to Bend. We have much to learn from our brothers and sisters, the trees, and as we explore these times, we also invite you to be a part of this series and these gatherings with your pictures, your videos, and more on that later with that invitation to send us material that you might have that can add to our series. Do you have a candle at home? If you do, I invite you to light that candle with us. As we light our candle here, we recognize that many things connect us and join us. Light being only one of them, the light that is within us and around us, the light that we try to nurture with our living, with our learning, with our relationships, and with our connecting. Make wherever you are right now a special place. If it's not with a candle, perhaps it's with the location you're in, the view you have, or just the special posture or breath that you might take right now. Make that place a peaceful and loving and connected place where we can be together for the next little while. Welcome into this time. Welcome yourself into this time with a song, with music, with deep, loving connection.
As trees reach up to the sunlight, as leaves unfurl in the spring, as roots dig deep into history, our lives seek wisdom to sing. This is a glimpse of the journey. This is the hope of our soul.
You know, it's important for us to have ideas, to have wonderful, beautiful thoughts about tomorrow and the next day. We might call them dreams. We might call them ideas. We might just call them thoughts that float in and float away. But it's important to have those dreams and those thoughts and ideas. And it's important to hold on to them, because even if they seem silly, they're important because they guide us into tomorrow. They help us live for something important. They help us work for something important. I want to share another tree book with you this morning. It's called A Tree This Tall by Inez Rice, and it's illustrated by Alvin Smith. Jeremy lived on a street of narrow wooden houses. Each one stood tightly against the next, as if they were trying to hold each other up. The houses all looked alike, very old and very much used. Since the paint had peeled off a long time ago, the weather had stained them gray. Early one morning, as Jeremy was starting down his front steps, he saw something strange lying right in the middle of the sidewalk. Quickly, he ran down the steps to pick it up. No one saw him except a thin gray squirrel peeking from behind a trash can. Jeremy stared at the object in his hand. An acorn! Half of it was as smooth as polished wood, and the other half was as rough as the bark of a tree. Jeremy sat down on the bottom step where it sagged the most. He was holding the acorn firmly in his fist. He would grow a tree, the very first tree on the whole block. Everybody would be glad. His mother would throw up her hands and say, "What a lovely tree!" On spring mornings, she would open the windows to hear the birds sing. The birds would build nests in the tree. The baby birds would poke their heads up and peep. Perhaps the speckled pigeon that always stood alone on the sidewalk with his head cocked to one side would like to sit in the tree too. His father would build a swing from a top branch. Jeremy would swing high over the roofs, waving to people for blocks around. He might even swing high enough to see a parade over on Broad Street. Now, the only swing Jeremy could use was that old tire hanging from a stunted tree blocks away. But he couldn't swing high, not high at all, because it was too hard to pump. On hot summer days, there would be cool shade on his front steps. The leaves would rustle to each other as they moved in the breeze. Jeremy would sit and listen to them. Other people would stop to listen too. Now, without any shade, everyone stood in groups and complained about the heat. In the fall, his tree would be all red and gold. The bright leaves would come tumbling down faster and faster. Jeremy would rake them into a huge pile on the sidewalk, and then he would jump into that huge pile and roll over and over until his whole world was nothing but leaves. Now, the only time that Jeremy saw a bright leaf on the ground was in the fall, when a wild wind blew. Then several might come scampering swiftly down the street with bits of trash. In the winter rainstorms, his oak tree would toss its dripping branches and tap merrily on the windows. On the clear, cold nights, it would stand stiff as a soldier, guarding his house. Any house would look happy when protected by a big oak tree. People would come from miles around just to see his tree. They'd wait in line to shake his hand and tell him how smart he was to have grown such a wonderful tree. His mother and father would stand on the stoop behind him and smile. They would be important too. Suddenly, his friend Peter was shouting, "What are you doing?" Jeremy held out his hand for Peter to see the acorn. "I'm going to grow a great big oak tree." Peter gently touched the acorn. "Where did you get it?" "I found it right here on the sidewalk." "You're lucky. Where are you going to grow it?" Peter sat down at the bottom step too. "Right there." Jeremy pointed to the narrow strip of earth running down the block. between the sidewalk and the curb. It was hard dirt. All the way down the block, it was the same. Let's plant it now so that it can start to grow. In a minute, said Jeremy, rubbing the wonderful acorn between his fingers. I wish I had an acorn too, Peter spoke. I'll give you one when my tree is all grown up. I'll give one to everyone on the whole block. Then each house will have a big oak tree in front of it. Peter was leaping about on the sidewalk. We'll have the greatest block ever. But my tree will be the tallest, Jeremy shouted, because it will be planted first. How tall will it be? This tall. Jeremy jumped up from the bottom step and threw the acorn high into the sky, and it went higher and higher. Jeremy clapped his hands before he held them up to catch the falling acorn. But that acorn didn't fall straight down. The boys watched in surprise as the acorn hit the sidewalk farther down the block. Jeremy ran toward it. Before he could pick it up again, that thin gray squirrel darted out from behind the trash can, leapt straight to the acorn, and snatched it up. He sat down with his fluffy tail arched up and looked over the acorn quickly. Then he cracked it with his sharp teeth. With his tiny claws, he peeled it and popped it into his mouth and chewed furiously. The squirrel moved so fast that Jeremy only had time to gasp. Hey! Peter yelled, don't do that! But in those few seconds, the hungry squirrel had eaten his breakfast. My tree is gone, Jeremy cried to the squirrel. You ate my tree. You ate my tree too, Peter was wailing. You ate a whole block of trees. The squirrel did seem to smile as if the trees had tasted mighty good. The next instant, he darted back behind the trash can. He must have been starving. Slowly, a sad Jeremy sat down again. Peter kicked the bottom step. Couldn't we find another acorn? Like where? In the park. Jeremy looked doubtful. Maybe, but why bother? A tree takes forever to grow anyway. Peter hopped from step to step. But think of the fun we'd have watching it. Jeremy shivered with delight. Suddenly, his dreams came back to him. We could take care of it together. He could see his tree once more, in all its different seasons, and he knew it would be worth waiting for.
Hi everyone, Curtis Tufts here. I'm out in Twin Brooks, up on the bank above White Mud Creek, just before it, where it joins up with the Black Mud Creek. I've been thinking about trees a lot lately on the invitation of Chris and Nancy in our Sunday gatherings with this tree theme. And one of the things that came to mind was a piece of poetry that I wrote a few years back when I was at a writing workshop with Lorna Crozier out at Naramata Center. And she invited us one day to write about a friend or a loved one or you coming back in a different form. And this is what I wrote. If it should turn out in the end that there is in fact no end, the Hindus having been right all along, so that on concluding this life, I will simply begin again in a new and different form, it seems to me that as a tree might not be a bad way to start over. As a tree, I would be long-lived, lithe-limbed, well-rooted, seasonally adjusted. As a tree, I would be drawing up just what I need from what's available nearby, and giving of myself for the good of the neighborhood. As a tree, I would be able to sway gracefully on blustery days, to let go of superfluous limbs and branches in a gale, and yet sensitive enough to let my leaves tremble in the very least of breezes. As a tree, I would be constitutionally incapable, save in the most extreme circumstances, of doing any real harm to anyone. As a tree, I would be naturally accommodating to birds, to spiders, to small children. As a tree, I would usually be found forested, standing in a community of like-minded souls, and yet essentially solitary. And though eventually fallen and laid low, even so, I would be yielding up my life for the sake of life.
to learn from our mistakes, drawing closer in our heartache, showing how to love, showing how to love, showing how to love.
This reading comes as an excerpt entitled Bent into Shape, The Rules of Tree Form. They're the words of Rachel Ehrenberg. How do different trees get their distinctive shapes? From the towering spires of spruce and fir, the massive spreading limbs of an oak to the stately arching canopies of an elm. The skeletal shape of trees offer signature silhouettes. Plant molecular biologist Chris Dardick's work, and that of other researchers also, could help explain how the shapes of individual trees are far from fixed. Trees, much more than we can, will morph in response to their literal neck in the woods. Limbs in the shade reach toward the spots of sunlight. Trees on windswept hills bend trunks and branches into gnarled architectures. Most animals are born in specific shapes and just grow larger. But plants are modular. They grow in various iterations of two building blocks, shoots and roots. It's the first of these. Where and when a shoot grows or doesn't grow, that's what governs the basic form a tree takes. Take your standard issue plant with a main central stem that grows upward and has a few side branches. Most plants, from basil to birch, start out this way. A growth habit that probably evolved because it enables them to quickly reach the light, more rapidly than the competition. Called apical dominance, this is largely under the purview of the plant hormone indolate acetic acid, also known as auxin. Made in the tip, auxin diffuses downward and blocks the growth of the side branches. That's why pinching off the tips of basil or geranium will make them bushy. You're removing the source of that bossy auxin, freeing buds on the stem sides from the prohibition and allowing them to grow. Physiology also underpins the adaptable responses trees have to more extreme situations they face. A tree on a high mountain peak or windswept coast must contend with exposure to mechanical forces that can topple and kill it. To survive, such trees become short and stocky, their bent, asymmetrical crowns reducing drag and presumably protecting the tree from violent gusts. The driver is the wind's very touch. Sometimes wind does more than gust against a tree. It blows the whole tree over, and that tree, if still rooted, must reorient the growth of its branches and buds toward the sky. Avalanches, erosion, and landslides deal similar fates. And trees in all sorts of circumstances must grow around obstacles, away from competitors, and toward the light. The hardwood tree first discerns that it is off kilter, using specially gravity-sensing cells. Where these cells reside in woody trees, the woody stem, the tip of new shoots, was unknown until California geneticists detected them in woody and soft tissues of poplars just a few years ago. The cells contained organelles called statholiths that sink down in the cell and indicate to the plant that it's leaning one way or the other. This in turn causes the influential auxin to mobilize, triggering the growth of tension, wood on top, that seems to act as the muscle that generates a pulling up force to right the tree's growth. Researchers still don't know how different tree species set the angles of their branches, going wide like an oak or arching like an elm. Trees are both kindred and foreign to us. Their various forms so familiar, but their architectural rules still, in so many ways, a mystery. As we seek to learn their secrets, may we find wisdom for our living.
I'm here in Deer Ridge Park, near our home, a grove of trees where our kids played when they were young, and it feels good to be in this forest and reflect on all that we're learning from trees. I'm thinking about those hormones in the very tips of the trees that tell it to focus its energy into one quick-growing stem instead of all those other branches, so that it can pop through the soil, reach toward the sun. I'm thinking about the wind that tells a tree to alter their shape to better withstand the forces blowing against it. I'm thinking about those gravity-sensing cells that tell a tree that it's sideways and to correct its trajectory upward, 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 always upward. Trees, we are beginning to understand, learn to bend and shape themselves in ways that ensure their own survival, the survival of their species, evolving into the best shape for their continued thriving in Earth's forests. And I think about this wisdom of bending trees. Trees seem to us so stable, so rooted, so rigid, so unmoving. And even so, they are adapting to their surroundings and becoming what they need to be at every moment, depending on their environment, reshaping, shifting, moving. You know, we need this tree wisdom lately. We've been, every one of us, thrown into a global situation in which our usual stance, our usual grounding, our typical coping mechanisms have been tested with new stresses after what many of you are telling us has already been way too long to be separated and isolated. We've had to change ourselves in these times. We've had to grow more flexible in our routines. We've had to grow patience. We've had to grow coping skills that we never thought we would need. And we've had to fill our days and deal with social distance, and also recognize that some days we're good at that, and some days we just are not. This has required our flexibility and our adaptability, our capability to bend. But which way will we bend? I'm reminded of the story of the Good Samaritan. This is a story that we tell often. It's a story that many of us know. It all started off with a religious scholar asking Jesus to define a word in the greatest commandment that he was teaching. Jesus was talking about that commandment to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And this religious scholar said, but what do you mean by neighbor? And so in response, Jesus tells a story. There was once a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho who fell upon robbers and was beaten and robbed and left half dead at the side of the road. Well, luckily, a priest was coming by, but when he saw him, it wasn't so lucky after all. He angled to the other side of the road to avoid getting involved. Oh, and then along came a second person, a respected member of the community, but that person too avoided the injured man. And so a third one came along. This third one was a Samaritan, a foreigner, a stranger in this land. And what did that Samaritan do? He was moved by compassion. And he went to him, and he tended his wounds. And he got him the help he needed. He checked him into a room. And the next morning he paid for the room, and he said, anything more that this man needs while he's here, give it to him. And I'll settle up when I return this way. He even left his credit card number. And so after telling this story, he said to the man who asked that original question, which one of these three loved his neighbor as himself? And the religious scholar said, well, the man who acted with compassion. And he said, yes, go and do likewise. You know, all of this talk about bending and being flexible and finding new ways in new conditions, this is all about love for me. Which way will we bend? Away from love or toward it? You know, praise be for all of the workers who've been putting themselves in the thick of things to care for others lately. Nurses and doctors, support workers and aides, all the ones who serve us and deliver to us. But surely they are not the only ones who must be called to love in these risky times. We are all challenged to bend towards love in this pandemic. Love calls upon us to learn new ways to love, to find new directions to express our care and compassion, to balance our safety with the safety of others, and the challenge that never changes, that we must still be people who, despite what's going on in the world, will be the ones known for our love. I want to talk to you about a kind of tree called the cook pine. The cook pine is native to the islands of the South Pacific, but it's found in many places, Australia, New Zealand, and then even California, Mexico, Hawaii. The weird thing about the cook pine is that it always bends towards the equator. The trees in the northern hemisphere bend to the south. The cook pines in the southern hemisphere bend to the north. On 5 continents in 18 different regions, the pattern is shockingly clear. They lean towards the equator. And the farther they are from the equator, the more they lean. Many scientists have studied them, but they don't know why this happens. They have guesses, but they're not yet conclusive in their answers to why they might bend toward the equator of the earth. And you know, that cook pine has some wisdom for me, and I hope it does for you. In this time, the more isolated, the more fearful, the more we need each other, the more all of the things that are happening in our world weigh on us in this global crisis, the more, too, that we must bend. The more vital it is that we bend toward love, bend toward finding ways to express our kindness and compassion. The more we must lean into caring for and loving our neighbor, even as we balance our own health and our own safety. How might we bend in new ways? How might we adapt and change our shape so as to ensure that our love might carry on? Oh, these trees and this wisdom, that we might live it, that we might breathe it, that we might live these trees' adaptations and desire to bend, to find light and to find health. May we always bend toward love and health. May it be so in so many ways.
Walking in the light of love. We are walking in the light of love. Walking in the light of love. We are walking in the light of love. We are walking. We are walking. Oh, we are walking in the light of love. We are walking, walking. We are walking. Oh, we are walking in the light of love.
As I mentioned earlier, we can contribute to this series of tree wisdom by sharing some of the pictures that we might have in our collections, pictures of trees. We might have a story to share about a particular tree or an experience with a tree, and we might videotape ourselves telling that story, or if you need help recording that story, we can offer that as well. Just some information on your screen now of where you can send those pictures and videos to those email addresses or any of those ways of connecting with us there. Also, some invitations to join us on our Monday weekly check-in Zoom call. That's every Monday at 3, and you're welcome to check your e-messenger for the link to have you join us at 3 p.m. tomorrow. If you don't have that link, please, again, contact us, and we'll make sure you have that. Also, something else happening tomorrow. Younger adults, the XYZ Zoom call will happen tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. If you're somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 to 40s, and in any way connected to SSUC, you're welcome to join us on that call as we talk about how we're doing and make some plans as we move forward during this time, and also to dream a little bit about when a tree might grow and we might gather again in person. Want to thank each and every one of you for the ways that you've continued to support us through this time. For those of you that give to us by pre-authorized remittance and automatic withdrawal, thank you for continuing that support. It means that we can continue the obligations and commitments that we have to other agencies, to our commitments around the world, and to our building and staff here. An invitation to donate in any way that you can, and we thank you for all of you that can donate what you can. You can donate online at our website at any time. You can drop off envelopes here during our office hours, which is just Thursday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. You can contact the office to buy grocery cards, which also continues to help our income, as a portion of those cards contributes to us. Or you can use snail mail to send in a donation to us at the address on the screen. Again, many thanks to each and every one of you who contribute in so many ways, whether it's through an email, through kind words, through the donations of your pictures, your videos, and through your financial and ongoing contributions to SSUC. We thank you so very much.
Just like the trees, our search for light is not without its obstacles. We have to reach, and we have to bend. We adapt to storms that are within and without. But as spiritual beings in a human experience, we too have an equator, a ground of being, a source that strengthens us, a wellspring of hope and possibility, a center of gravity. We call it by so many different names. We not only lean into the light of faith and hope and love, but we generate and bear that light as well. Sometimes our light shines brightly. Sometimes it's barely detectable. Sometimes the downdraft of fear and grief threatens to dim and extinguish the strength of the light within us. We take the gift of this time we have shared with one another, the many gifts of this day, and the wisdom of the trees that companion our journey, and somehow we know it will be enough as we change the energy of the flames that have accompanied us in this time. We change it into another form that it will take within us, between us, beyond us, among us.